It's 19 minutes before 1 o'clock. This is Country Fare from WGN Radio in Chicago. Here is a bulletin from WGN News just handed me. President Kennedy has been shot and seriously wounded.
For 60 years, the world was told that a lone gunman ended a presidency. But in December 2023, 13,173 long-hidden files were finally forced into the light, revealing DNA evidence the government concealed for decades. The genetic profiles don't match Oswald. For the first time, science points to multiple shooters and implicates a cover-up at the highest level. If these findings are true, everything we know about American power is about to change. So who really killed John F. Kennedy? The answer begins here. 13,173 pages. That is the number stamped across headlines and government servers in June 2023, as the National Archives finally released a cache of classified JFK assassination records. The scale is staggering. FBI surveillance logs, CIA cables, internal memos, and forensic reports, documents that had been locked away for decades, shielded by every president since Clinton. Each administration found a reason to delay: national security, sensitive sources, the threat of international fallout. The public waited as deadlines came and went. The 1992 JFK Records Act had promised full disclosure by 2017, but year after year, the files stayed sealed, redactions multiplying, answers slipping further from reach. Then, with a single directive, the Biden White House ordered agencies to review and release everything possible. The result was thousands of pages posted online, with headlines promising the end of the mystery. But the fine print told a different story. 4,300 files were still withheld, many pages covered in thick black lines, names and operations erased. In the newly opened files, investigators found reports that had never seen daylight. Informant statements, surveillance records, internal debates over evidence handling, and forensic summaries that raised more questions than they answered. Some documents detail the government's own doubts about the lone gunman theory. Others reveal arguments over autopsy findings, the chain of custody for key evidence, and the reliability of witness statements. The tension between transparency and secrecy plays out line by line, as the story of the assassination is rewritten by what the government chose to hide and what it was finally forced to reveal. This release was not a gift. It was the result of relentless pressure, lawsuits, freedom of information requests, and a public that refused to let the story die. For decades, researchers, journalists, and family members pressed for answers, demanding to know what was so dangerous in these files that it had to be kept from the world. Now, with the files in the open, the real investigation begins, not just into who pulled the trigger, but into why the truth was buried for so long. The archive itself becomes the evidence, each page a clue in a case that has never been closed. Inside the newly released files, the story takes a sharp turn from rumor to science. Among thousands of pages, a series of forensic reports surfaced, reports that had spent decades in the dark, their contents hidden even from congressional investigators. For the first time, DNA testing was applied to fragments collected from the assassination scene: bullet shards, torn fabric, blood-stained clothing, and the interior of the presidential limousine. The results were not just surprising, they were impossible to square with the official story. Multiple genetic profiles appeared across the evidence. Some matched President Kennedy and Governor Connally, as expected. But two additional male profiles, completely unidentified, were detected on bullet fragments and skull tissue. These profiles did not match Lee Harvey Oswald, any known suspect, or any member of the medical or security teams present that day. Chain of custody documents, stamped and logged, revealed that these findings were not new. A memo dated 1998, buried in a folder marked Forensic Confidential, documented the presence of extra profiles. The government had known for a quarter century that the evidence did not fit the lone gunman theory. Instead of publicizing the results, officials classified the reports, restricting access even from independent review boards. Forensic material from the limousine seats and floor showed 4 separate DNA signatures, none belonging to Oswald. Shell casings and cigarette butts collected from the scene pointed to multiple individuals who have never been identified. Blood analysis on the clothing turned up sources beyond the 2 official victims. The scientific record was clear. The crime scene was contaminated by more than one perpetrator, and the government chose silence over disclosure. When independent laboratories finally re-examined the evidence in 2023, the findings lined up with what had been hidden for years. Genetic markers consistent with 3 or 4 separate shooters, positioned at different vantage points, made the single gunman narrative scientifically untenable. Dr. Cyril Wecht, a forensic pathologist who spent decades fighting for access to this evidence, put it bluntly, "These files change everything about that day." The DNA results, once suppressed, now stood as the most direct challenge to the official story. The question was no longer just who fired the shots, but why the truth had been locked away for so long. At Bethesda Naval Hospital, the autopsy of President Kennedy unfolded under a level of military control rarely seen into civilian death investigations. Armed guards stood at every entrance. Navy pathologists, Dr. James Humes, Dr. J. Thornton Boswell, and Dr. Pierre Fink, were tasked with examining the most scrutinized body in American history. Their experience with gunshot wounds was limited. Senior officers issued direct instructions throughout the night, dictating what could and could not be examined. Original handwritten notes made at the autopsy table were destroyed by Dr. Humes before the official report was typed. In sworn testimony, Dr. Humes admitted burning his notes in his home fireplace, saying they were stained with the president's blood. No independent record survives of what those first observations contained. Photographs and X-rays, essential for reconstructing the wounds, were tightly restricted from the start. Some images never entered the official archive. Medical technicians have alleged that other images are missing or substituted. The complete set has never been made available for outside forensic review. Requests for access by independent pathologists, including Dr. Cyril Wecht, were routinely denied. The Kennedy family deeded control of the autopsy materials to the National Archives, but with strict limits on who could examine them, effectively sealing crucial evidence from public scrutiny for decades. The brain, removed during the autopsy for further study, vanished from government storage by 1966. Official records show it was placed in a stainless steel container and cataloged at Bethesda, but chain of custody logs break down after 1965. No documented transfer or destruction exists. The House Select Committee on Assassinations later called the missing brain a serious deficiency in the investigation, but the gap was never closed. Without the missing brain, independent experts cannot reconstruct the bullet paths through Kennedy's skull, a loss that permanently blocks a full forensic review. Discrepancies between the emergency room doctors at Parkland Hospital and the Bethesda pathologists became a source of lasting conflict. Dallas physicians described a small, clean wound in the front of Kennedy's neck, consistent with an entry. Bethesda's final report, however, reclassified this as an exit wound, supporting the theory of a single bullet fired from behind. Hospital staff in Dallas also documented a large, gaping wound at the back of the president's head, while the official autopsy placed it farther forward. These contradictions were never resolved. Instead, the autopsy report was revised multiple times, with wound locations and descriptions altered to fit the lone shooter narrative. Testimony from doctors who disagreed was suppressed or omitted from official summaries. The destruction of original notes, the disappearance of the brain, the restricted access to photographs, and the shifting wound descriptions all point to a pattern of obstruction, not accident. Each missing piece closes off another avenue for independent verification, leaving only the government's version of events. The evidence was not just mishandled, it was actively withheld, rewritten, or erased. The result is a medical record that cannot be trusted, and a crime scene that will never be fully reconstructed. The single bullet theory was never just a matter of belief. It was a calculation, measured in seconds, angles, and wounds. Yet every attempt to prove it has ended in failure. In 1967, CBS assembled a team of expert marksmen, handed them the same bolt-action rifle, and set them up with moving targets matching the distance and speed of Kennedy's motorcade. Not one could fire 3 accurate shots in the time Lee Harvey Oswald was said to have managed, let alone hit 2 men with a single bullet that emerged nearly undamaged. The bullet found on a hospital stretcher, labeled Commission Exhibit 399, was supposed to explain 7 wounds in 2 bodies. But when independent panels fired identical rounds through animal bone, every test bullet was flattened, deformed, or shattered, never pristine. The missing mass from the victim's wounds exceeded what the bullet had lost. No trajectory lined up with the seating positions seen in the Zapruder film. The so-called magic bullet theory failed every physical test. By 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations brought in audio analysts to study a police dictabelt recording from Dealey Plaza. Their conclusion was 4 distinct shots, not 3. One came from the direction of the grassy knoll, front right of the presidential limousine. This finding alone destroys the official timeline. The Warren Commission never reviewed the dictabelt and never considered that the evidence contradicted its own case. Later attempts to discredit the acoustic analysis could not erase the fact that the committee's own experts stood by their work. The committee's final report stated there was a high probability of a conspiracy. Witness testimony only makes the collapse clearer. 52 people in Dealey Plaza said shots came from the front right, the famous grassy knoll. 32 others reported gunfire from more than one direction. These accounts were buried, minimized, or left out of the official record. Even the physical evidence at the scene, smoke and the smell of gunpowder at ground level, was ignored. The story demanded a lone shooter, and every contradiction was swept aside. Then the suspect himself was silenced. Lee Harvey Oswald, arrested but never convicted, was shot dead in police custody by Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner with known mob ties. Oswald told the press he was just a patsy. When asked by the Warren Commission why he killed Oswald, Jack Ruby replied that he could not tell the truth there because his life was in danger. With Oswald gone, the chance for a trial and for cross-examination of evidence vanished forever. The official story depends on a sequence of events that cannot be reproduced by science, cannot be squared with witness accounts, and cannot be defended without omitting key facts. The evidence points in every direction, but the one the government insisted was true. The lone gunman theory is not just unlikely, it is physically impossible. In the months before Dallas, the CIA ran paramilitary operations across the Gulf Coast, training Cuban exiles in sabotage and precision shooting. Official records tie these camps to Florida and Louisiana, but the agency's own cables show a steady flow of operatives and weapons through Texas. By November 1963, anti-Castro fighters with advanced marksmanship were moving in and out of Dallas, their names scrubbed from the public record. Declassified files reveal that the CIA JMW AVE station in Miami handled logistics for these units. But the paper trail turns to shadows the closer it gets to the day of the assassination. The story takes a darker turn in Mexico City. Weeks before President Kennedy was killed, someone using Lee Harvey Oswald's name visited both the Soviet and Cuban embassies. The CIA watched every move, tapping phones and taking surveillance photographs. The man in the photographs does not look like Oswald, and the voice on the tapes does not match his. Agency memos confirm that the Mexico City station sent these materials to headquarters, but the originals vanished after the station chief's death. The official explanation was that the tapes and photos were destroyed as a matter of routine. Congressional investigators later found that the Warren Commission was never told about the mismatched evidence or the missing files. In 2007, E. Howard Hunt, a senior CIA officer and veteran of covert operations, gave a deathbed statement to his son. Hunt named colleagues he claimed were involved in a plot to kill the president, including Frank Sturgis, David Morales, Cord Meyer, and others, describing it as the big event that saved the agency. The confession, captured on tape, remains disputed by Hunt's family and was never entered as formal evidence. But the names he listed match those found in declassified agency rosters and operational logs from the period. These were not fringe figures. They were the men who ran secret wars, toppled foreign governments, and built the networks that could carry out an assassination in plain sight. The government's files show capability and motive, all hidden behind decades of secrecy and redaction. 4,300 files remain locked, their contents hidden behind official seals and redacted lines. The government's justification is always the same: national security, protection of sources, and the risk of diplomatic fallout. But the clock keeps ticking. The law demands these records be opened by 2029, yet every deadline in the past has slipped quietly by, replaced with new excuses and fresh signatures. The names inside those pages are not just relics of the Cold War. Some belong to living witnesses, intelligence contacts, and figures tied to organized crime. Alliances forged in the shadows, protected by layers of bureaucracy. The same networks that shaped the events of 1963 still cast their influence over what the public is allowed to know. The files that do reach daylight arrive with entire paragraphs blacked out, operational details erased. Key memos end mid-sentence. Surveillance reports list only initials or code names. Even now, the agencies tasked with protecting the nation decide what history remains off-limits. The promise of full disclosure remains unfulfilled, replaced by a system that shields not just methods, but reputations and institutional power. The story of the Kennedy assassination is not only about a crime in Dallas, but about the machinery built to keep secrets, machinery that still operates, decades after the shots were fired. Congressional committees have come and gone. Presidents have pledged transparency. Yet the most sensitive documents are still out of reach, their release delayed, their contents known only to a select few. The last pages may never see the light, protected by the same logic that kept the truth hidden for 60 years. The cover-up endures, not for the sake of the past, but to defend the interests and alliances that remain intact today. Today, more than 4,000 JFK files remain locked away, shielded by national security, even as every living witness disappears. With every redaction, institutions rewrite history in real time. The science exposes the fiction, but power protects itself. Until all records see daylight, the real story is not just about the past, it is about who decides what truth the public gets to know. What do you think still lies behind those sealed pages?